In the European country with the highest income disparity, the richest 1% of the population earns 55 times more than the poorest 50%. In today's video, we'll talk about economic inequality, and we'll examine the 10 European nations plus one with the widest wealth gaps. This ranking includes countries from both Western and Eastern Europe, as well as from the North and South. As always, we based this video on official sources, such as data published by EUROSTAT. Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 10. Portugal. Portugal is facing a problem of wealth inequality, although this gap has been slightly decreasing in recent years. According to Eurostat, the Gini coefficient, a measure of income inequality, in Portugal was 0.32 in 2022, higher than the EU average of 0.296. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the problem, with data showing that the number of people in poverty in Portugal increased by 12.5% in 2020, one of the highest increases in the Eurozone. At the same time, the number of individuals with high net worth has increased significantly. According to the Portuguese tax authorities, the number of taxpayers with an annual income of over €750,000 or a net worth of over €5 million has quintupled since 2014. To give you an idea of this inequality, in 2021 these high-income earners contributed €18 billion to the state coffers, which is about 40% of the total state budget. One last important thing to say is that there is a clear divide between the finances of those living on the coastal strip, which is wealthier due to the high level of tourism, and the much poorer hinterland. Number 9. Spain. In Spain, there is generally a large gap between the north and the south of the country, with some exceptions. In some Spanish autonomous communities, more than a tenth of the population lives in severe poverty. The most affected regions are Andalusia, the Canary Islands, the region of Murcia and Extremadura. The autonomous cities of Melilla and Ceuta far exceed the national average in terms of severe poverty, with a gap of over 14 percentage points. On the contrary, the autonomous regions with the lowest percentage of people in severe poverty are the Basque Country, Cantabria, and Aragon, located some in the north and others in the northeast of the country. One northern region that is not doing well, however, is Asturias, with 9.2% of its population at risk of poverty. Overall, around 26% of Spaniards are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Of these, 4.2 million people live in extreme poverty, with less than €560 per month. The prestigious website Forbes states that there are 29 billionaires in Spain, and their wealth amounts to a total of approximately 14% of the national GDP. In 2022, Spain's Gini coefficient was also 0.32 points, down from 2014, with the richest 20% of the population earning an average of 5.63 times more than the poorest 20%. Number 8. Serbia. Among the former Yugoslav nations, Serbia is the worst affected by this issue. First of all, Serbia has a high unemployment rate. In 2018, Serbia had an overall employment rate of 63.1% and an unemployment rate of 12.9%. Additionally, few Serbs have access to higher education. In 2018, it was 25.7%. It is striking that university graduates in Serbia have almost the same unemployment rate as people who dropped out of school after primary school, while in Slovenia, another former Yugoslav country, the percentages for the two categories differ significantly. A study states that this shows that there is no great distinction between skilled and unskilled workers in Serbia, with the consequence that more qualified workers are hired less efficiently. However, it should also be said that Serbia is the nation among the former Yugoslav states that is improving the fastest in terms of income inequality. In fact, in 2022 the Gini coefficient was 0.32, equal to Portugal and Spain, but in 2015 it was as high as 0.4 points. This means that Serbia has been able to improve by 8 points in 7 years. We truly hope that things continue this way for them. Number 7. Romania. Romania also has a Gini coefficient of 0.32, tied with the nations we have seen so far, but it is in 7th place because the coefficient in previous years was higher than the others. Romania is a country of contrasts. In November 2023, the general unemployment rate was 5.4%, one of the lowest in Europe. But if you look at young people, it's a different story. Youth unemployment is 22.9%, one of the highest in the European Union. The northwest of the country is an exception, with youth unemployment of only 7%, while the southwest is the most affected. According to various studies, the main causes seem to be low wages and high school dropout rates. More than 15% of young people in Romania aged 18 to 24 have not completed lower secondary education. Here, 12.1% of young people aged 15 to 19 are neither studying nor working, the second worst figure in Europe. Furthermore, dropping out of school in Romania leads to difficulties in finding work, lower wages, a risk of poverty, and obviously increases migration, with a consequent decrease in population, as we have already seen in the video on the 10 European countries that are emptying the fastest. Paradoxically, Romania is one of the fastest growing countries in the European Union in economic terms, but young people do not seem to be benefiting from this growth. As we said, Romania is a country of contrasts. Number 6. Italy. If Romania was in second place in Europe for young people aged 15 to 19 who neither study nor work, Italy is in first place. In fact, in Italy, 13.2% of young people neither work nor study. In this country, income inequality among the working-age population grew considerably in the early 1990s, remained high until 2015, and further increased during the pandemic year. According to various studies, one cause of this inequality is the ever-increasing number of part-time jobs, especially for women. Furthermore, there has been an explosion in the number of companies hiring employees mainly on temporary contracts, which very rarely turn into permanent contracts in the future. However, the greatest income inequality in Italy is between the north and the south of the country. According to official data from the Italian Ministry of Finance, the gross annual income in northern Italy in 2021 was €30,800, in the center €29,300 and in the south and islands €26,300. The region where people earn the most is Lombardy, with an average gross salary of almost €32,500, while in Basilicata people earn €7,500 less. In 2022, the Italian Gini coefficient was 0.327 points, up from 2014. Number 5. Albania. There is not much updated data on Albania. Official statistics from 2018 show that inequality is high in Albania. 40% of households lack material income and 23% of the Albanian population is at risk of falling into poverty. The pandemic has only exacerbated these figures. In fact, although Albania had one of the lowest rates of economic decline in the Western Balkans, the number of poor people increased more than anywhere else during the pandemic. According to World Bank estimates, the pandemic has generated 112,000 more poor people in Albania. Rural areas are generally poorer. In fact, there is a great disparity in Albania between the various prefectures. The richest is undoubtedly the prefecture of Tirana, with a GDP per capita of 135% of the national average. It is followed by the prefectures of Fier and Gjirokastër. The three poorest prefectures are those of Lecce, Elbasan and especially Kukës, with a GDP per capita of 61% of the national average. An interesting fact is that during the period 2010 to 2018, productivity in the economy increased by 7%, while the average real wage increased by only 3%. This shows that companies have increased productivity through technological innovation or process optimization, but have not necessarily shared these gains with workers by increasing their salaries. In 2021, the Gini coefficient was 0.33 points, down in recent years. Number 4. United Kingdom. The UK Gini coefficient data provided by EUROSTAT stops at 2018, and it was 0.335 points, up from previous years. Doing more recent research, we have seen only slight variations in recent years. It seems that in the UK the pandemic has exacerbated the inequalities between rich and poor. In 2022, the incomes of the 14 million poorest people fell by 7.5% compared to the pre-pandemic period, while the incomes of the richest fifth saw an increase of 7.8%. Also in 2022, the poorest fifth of society owns only 8% of total income, while the richest fifth owns 36%. If we look at how much the incomes of the richest 1% of the population have grown in each European country, it seems that the British one has grown much more than that of other European nations. In short, the rich are getting much richer, and the poor are getting much poorer. The causes of this economic inequality seem to be multiple. Various studies show that one cause is technological change. In the UK, in fact, there has been a growing gap between people with high technological skills and those who have not been able to keep up. Educational attainment also plays a primary role. In the UK, the most educated and qualified people tend to have much higher earnings, unlike what we said happens in Serbia. Then there is the whole issue of executive pay, which has been increasing steadily in recent years. Various studies show many other causes. Write in the comments what you think about the topic. Number 3. Latvia. Latvia has a Gini coefficient of 0.343 points. Here, the richest 20% of the population earns 6.33 times more than the poorest 20%. Latvia is one of those nations that has seen an economic boom in recent years, but there is still a lot of inequality. And it seems that this inequality is mainly geographical. In fact, the metropolis of Riga accounts for about 2/3 of the country's economic growth. In recent years, Riga and the surrounding area have generated up to 69% of Latvia's GDP. Suffice it to say that Latvia has a population of 1.83 million, of which 850,000 live in the Riga metropolitan area. Non-metropolitan areas are struggling with a number of problems, including high unemployment and an aging population. The poorest region is Latgale. Here, the average monthly household income in 2021 was €977, while in the Riga region it was almost double. The percentage of people living in poverty is a serious problem in the regions located far from the capital. While in recent years only 5% of the population in the Riga metropolitan area had an income below the minimum level, this percentage reached 10% in the periphery and up to 14% in Latgale. Number 2. Lithuania. In Lithuania, a large gap can be seen between young and old people. According to OECD data, 9.9% of Lithuanian minors live below the poverty line, but the percentage is much higher among the elderly. In Lithuania, almost 28% of those over 65 live on an income less than 50% of the median income. Several factors have contributed to this. First of all, Lithuania has experienced one of the largest emigration phenomena in Europe, especially since it joined the European Union. As we have already seen in the dedicated video, in the last 12 years Lithuania has lost almost 18% of its population, mainly due to young people emigrating abroad. This has brought several disadvantages to the country. Many of the over 50s who remained in Latvia worked in agriculture, but the share of people employed in agriculture in Latvia has more than halved in the last 20 years. Older people have not been able to keep up with the times and with the new job demands, unlike the young people who have decided to stay in the country, and this is why the economic gap between the two age groups has widened. These are just some of the reasons that have led Lithuania to a Gini coefficient of 0.362. In fact, in Lithuania, the richest 20% of the population earns 6.39 times more than the poorest 20%. Before revealing number 1 and the final bonus, if you found this video interesting and want more content like this, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to not miss any updates. Thank you very much. Number 1. Bulgaria. Bulgaria has a Gini coefficient of 0.384, which means that this country, along with all the nations mentioned so far, has an economic inequality that can be defined as moderate. But there is one nation that fares even worse, and we will see it in the final bonus. The poorest 20% of the Bulgarian population earns 7.30 times less than the richest 20%. But if we only consider the very rich, the richest 1% receive 55 times more income than the poorest 50%. The three most affected categories are pensioners, the unemployed, and women. In 2019, 34.3% of pensioners were at risk of poverty, and this figure rises to 58.9% for the unemployed. There are various causes of this economic disparity. Some studies show that one cause is a low-level education system that does not guarantee quality education, especially for low-income and marginalized groups. This would also lead to low-skilled work, which is more vulnerable to technological change. Another cause could be the high dependence on government aid, which, according to these studies, does not create opportunities for success in the labor market and instead reduces the motivation to actively participate in the workforce. There also seems to be a disparity between the different districts in Bulgaria. The richest district is Sofia, with a GDP per capita of 124% of the EU average. The poorest district is Silistra, with a GDP per capita of 26% of the EU average. We could add one more nation to the 10 we have mentioned. In fact, if we also consider transcontinental countries, Bulgaria would not be the nation with the greatest economic disparity, but Turkey. Turkey is considered a transcontinental country, as 3% of its territory lies within the geographical boundaries of the European continent. In 2021, Turkey recorded a Gini coefficient of 0.462. While all the other countries mentioned so far have a moderate level of disparity, Turkey has a high economic inequality. Here, the richest 20% of the population earns 8.8 times more than the poorest 20%. The Confederation of Turkish Trade Unions has reported that the poverty line, that is the minimum amount a family of four needs to spend to feed itself, is now higher than the minimum wage. This is despite the government's 34% increase in the minimum wage in the second half of 2023. One of the main causes is said to have been years of very high inflation, with prices rising by an average of 70%. However, the rich are getting richer. In Istanbul, the richest 1% of the population owns 29% of the income of all families in the city, and earns 322 times more than the poorest 1%. This income is higher than the total income of three developed Turkish cities, Izmir, Ankara and Bursa, and almost equal to the total income of the Black Sea region. What we have written are just a few of the causes of inequality between rich and poor in Europe. We know that we have touched on a delicate topic, and we hope we have done so with the proper respect for the people involved. In the comments, write what you think about this situation. If you found this video interesting, we recommend the one on the European countries with the highest salaries, which you can find in the top right corner, or other videos on our channel. Well, that's all for this video. See you next time.